They said women's basketball couldn't sell. They said no female athlete could crack the mainstream. No WNBA player could go viral without a scandal. No woman with a basketball in her hand could make America stop scrolling. Then Caitlin Clark dropped a commercial, and the internet broke. Not broke like a trending hashtag. Broke like brands were calling. Networks were scrambling. Marketing executives who had spent 20 years ignoring women's sports were suddenly in emergency meetings asking one question: how did she do that? But here's what nobody is talking about. The commercial everyone is losing their minds over right now, it almost didn't happen. And the reason it almost didn't happen reveals something about Caitlin Clark that no highlight reel, no stat line, and no ESPN segment has ever truly captured. This is not a story about basketball. This is a story about moment. A calculated, once-in-a-generation collision between timing, talent, and a brand decision so bold that the people who made it were nervous right up until the second it aired. Let's go back to the beginning, before the sold-out arenas, before the Indiana Fever became the most watched team in WNBA history, before fans were camping outside stadiums in cities that had never cared about women's basketball. Caitlin Clark was still a college kid in Iowa, but the brands weren't waiting for her to go pro. They were already watching, and what they saw scared them a little, because Caitlin Clark wasn't just good at basketball. She was magnetic in a way that doesn't show up in scouting reports. The way she talked to cameras felt unrehearsed. The way she carried herself in big moments felt cinematic. And the numbers coming out of Iowa women's basketball were numbers that made no sense until you understood that this wasn't just a player. This was a character, a protagonist. Someone the audience was emotionally invested in before she ever played a professional minute. But building a brand around that, that's a risk. Because the WNBA has seen stars before. Cheryl Swoops, Lisa Leslie, Diana Taurasi, Candace Parker, Breanna Stewart, Aya Wilson, one of the most dominant players this league has ever produced. These women were brilliant. They were transcendent on the court, and the mainstream still looked away. So why would this be different? The answer came in the form of a script, a commercial script. A few pages that one creative director believed in so hard, she staked her professional reputation on it. And what was in that script, what that commercial actually does to the viewer, is something that no one in sports marketing had been brave enough to try in years. But before we get there, you need to understand what Caitlin Clark walked into. Because the WNBA she entered in 2024 was not the same league it was 5 years before. The league was at an inflection point. Tensions were real. The fan base was divided. Veteran players had built something extraordinary over decades of grinding, playing overseas in the offseason just to survive financially, fighting for resources, fighting for coverage, fighting to be taken seriously. And then a rookie walks in. Camera crews follow her everywhere. Sponsors line up. Ticket prices triple in cities she visits. And some of the women who built that league with their bare hands are sitting in locker rooms watching it happen and feeling something complicated. That tension, that friction, that real human, messy story unfolding inside a professional locker room, the commercial tapped directly into it. Not in a way that was exploitative. Not in a way that threw anyone under the bus. But in a way that was so smart, so emotionally precise, that when fans watched it for the first time, half of them laughed and half of them got chills. And then both have shared it. The view count climbed. Then it climbed faster. Then it hit a number that made the brand's analytics team check their dashboard twice because they thought something was broken. It wasn't broken. It was working. Better than anything they had ever launched. But here's the part that will genuinely shock you. The moment in the commercial that everyone keeps replaying. The 5-second clip that's been screenshot, memed, and posted across every platform was not planned. It was not in the original script. It happened on set in a single take, and the director almost cut it. Almost. The moment almost ended up on the cutting room floor. Think about that. The single most talked about second of commercial that generated millions of impressions, that made marketing executives rewrite their entire women's sports strategy, that turned casual viewers into obsessive fans, almost didn't make it into the final cut. Why? Because it was too real. And in advertising, real is terrifying. Real is unpredictable. Reel doesn't fit neatly into a 30-second slot designed by a committee that spent 6 months building a brand-safe, focus-grouped, liability-check version of an athlete's personality. But someone in that editing room made a decision. They kept it in, and that decision changed everything. Here's what you need to understand about how this commercial was actually built, because the strategy behind it is more sophisticated than it looks. On the surface, it feels spontaneous. It feels like you're watching Caitlin Clark just being herself. That feeling? That's the product of months of work. That's the result of a creative team studying her, not her basketball, her presence, the way she reacts when something surprises her, the way her competitiveness flashes across her face before she can control it, the way she laughs, the way she goes quiet right before she says something that lands perfectly. They weren't casting an athlete. They were casting a character who already existed. And the character they found was someone the WNBA audience already knew, but someone the mainstream had never been properly introduced to. So the commercial becomes an introduction, but not the kind brands usually make. Not the polished highlight reel. Isn't she amazing kind? This was the kind of introduction where you feel like you're meeting someone real, where you walk away thinking, I know her now. I like her. I'm rooting for her. That psychological shift from spectator to supporter is worth more than any billboard. It's worth more than a Super Bowl slot, because it doesn't just make you aware of someone, it makes you invested. And invested viewers do something that awareness alone never achieves. They evangelize. They send the clip to their friends. They post it with a caption. They defend it in comment sections. They watch it again and again, and then they start paying attention to the game. They tune into a fever broadcast for the first time, and suddenly they understand why the arena is loud, why the crowd surges when she crosses half court, why Aya Wilson, the reigning MVP, the most decorated player of her generation, suddenly had a commercial rival in terms of cultural conversation. Not because Clark was better, but because the marketing infrastructure around her had figured out something IAS team was still catching up to. That's a complicated truth, and the WNBA community felt it. Because Aya Wilson is extraordinary. What she has done for the Las Vegas Aces, for the league, for the visibility of women's basketball, it is foundational. She is a champion. She is a 2-time MVP. She is exactly the kind of player this league built itself around. And yet, the commercial budgets weren't lining up at her door the way they were lining up at Clark's. Why? That question has an answer. And the answer isn't about talent. It's not about work ethic. It's not even entirely about marketability in the traditional sense. It's about a system, a deeply embedded, frustratingly consistent pattern in how American sports media decides who gets the megaphone. But something shifted because the commercial didn't just elevate Clark. It created a conversation. And in that conversation, other names started getting louder. Brands that had been sitting on the sidelines suddenly realized the entire WNBA was a gold mine they had been walking past for 20 years. Breanna Stewart's team noticed. Angel Reese's team noticed. Sabrina Ionescu's team noticed. The commercial didn't just sell a product. It cracked a door open that the league had been pushing against for decades. But here is where the story gets genuinely unpredictable. Because the brand behind this commercial, the one that made the decision to go all in on that unscripted moment, wasn't the biggest name attached to Caitlin Clark. It wasn't her most lucrative deal. It wasn't even the campaign her own team was most excited about heading into the season. It was a calculated gamble by a mid-level account executive who had been told twice to scale back the concept. She didn't scale back. She doubled down. She fought for the version that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. And when the metrics came back, when the engagement numbers landed and the brand's internal dashboard showed a spike unlike anything they had tracked in years, her phone rang. It was the CEO. And what he said next set off a chain reaction inside the sports marketing world that nobody saw coming. The CEO said 4 words. Give her the campaign. Not the spot. Not the seasonal push. Not the carefully budgeted, quarterly approved, single market rollout that the conservative side of the boardroom had been lobbying for. The whole campaign. Full budget. Full creative control. Full commitment to building something that had never been built around a women's basketball player at this scale, at this speed, with this level of institutional backing. And the executive who fought for it, the one who had been told twice to scale it back, sat in her office after that call and felt something she hadn't felt in years of working in sports marketing. She felt afraid, because now it had to work, not just perform. Work, change something, move a number that had been stuck for 20 years. Because that's what she had promised. Not in a meeting, not in a pitch deck. In a conversation she had with herself a night before the final cut decision, standing in an edit bay at midnight, watching that unscripted 5-second moment on loop. She had promised herself that if she kept it in, if she fought for the real version instead of the saved version, it would matter. And now the world was about to find out if she was right. The campaign launched on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it wasn't a sports story anymore. It was a culture story. Morning shows were running segments. Fashion publications were writing think pieces. Podcasts that had never once mentioned the WNBA were dedicating entire episodes to what this commercial said about America's relationship with women's athletics. The numbers were staggering, but the numbers weren't even the most important part. The most important part was what happened in the comments. Because buried inside millions of reactions, the memes, the praise, the debates, the discourse were comments from a specific kind of viewer. Not the diehard fans, not the analytics accounts, not the sports journalists. Regular people. People who said things like, "I've never watched a WNBA game in my life, but I just bought tickets." People who said, "My daughter saw this and asked me who she was, and now we're watching every Fever game together." People who said, "I don't even like basketball, but I watched this 3 times." That is not advertising. That is conversion. That is a commercial doing something that most campaigns never achieve, reaching people who weren't looking for it, and making them feel like they found something. And here is the twist that nobody in the sports world predicted. The commercial's ripple effect didn't stay with Clark. Within 60 days of the campaign's peak, 3 other WNBA players announced major brand partnerships. Not endorsement deals, campaigns. Full creative campaigns with budgets that would have been unthinkable 12 months earlier. Angel Reese signed a deal that her agent described as the most aggressive women's basketball contract he had ever negotiated. Sabrina Ionescu's existing partnerships were renewed and expanded, and Aya Wilson, finally, undeniably, in the way she had always deserved, landed a campaign that put her face on billboards in markets that had never prioritized women's sports before. The rising tide lifted every boat. That's the part that gets lost when people talk about Caitlin Clark's commercial genius. They focus on Clark. And Clark is extraordinary. Her timing, her authenticity, her once-in-a-generation ability to make a camera feel like a conversation. All of it is real. All of it is earned. But the genius wasn't just hers. The genius was in recognizing that one perfectly executed moment of realness, one unscripted 5 seconds that an editor almost deleted, could do what 2 decades of league marketing had struggled to do: make the mainstream stop, look, and feel something. Diana Taurasi built this league on fire and fury. Candace Parker built it on grace and resilience. Breanna Stewart built it on relentless excellence. Aya Wilson built it on power and pride. They handed the next generation something real, something hard-won. And Caitlin Clark walked into a commercial set, forgot the script for 5 seconds, did something completely her, and accidentally handed it back to all of them. The brands didn't just invest in a player. They finally invested in the league. And the league? The league is just getting started. So the next time someone tells you a commercial is just a commercial, remember this one. Remember the editor who almost cut it. Remember the executive who almost scaled it back. Remember the 5 seconds that changed the conversation. Because sometimes the most genius thing in the room isn't the script. It's the moment nobody planned.